Welcome, everyone, to week 6 of our devotional series of What Makes a Hero. And this is the last week. It was always planned to kind of land on this week because of the theme. We, this week, are moving into Holy Week. Um, when everyone looks at this, if you look at it at the time that we originally planned for it to, the Tuesday night Bible study, it's going to be living forever here on YouTube and Facebook. But if you are doing it, we're a part of Holy Week right now. I am recording this on Saturday. Tomorrow is Palm Sunday, and tomorrow is going to be a unique situation. Very, very. I'm used to Palm Sundays with loud pomp and circumstance, and it's gonna be unique creating that experience in an empty building with just my family. We're gonna try. We're gonna do something cool, something unique. I'm hoping that everything falls into play. There, as I record this on Saturday, there's still one dangling thread out, and I'm hoping sometime before this evening that dangling thread is sewn into place. So, but here we are at Holy Week, and our theme for week 6 in Matt Rowley's book, "What Makes a Hero," the the life-changing journey of Christ. We are looking at life, death, and the resurrection. Let's talk about the importance of heroes for a moment. Heroes sort of set an image for individuals on possibilities. Heroes set an image for individuals on the way things could possibly be. They become an image of us, of where we see a shortcoming, and they become the image on how to overcome that shortcoming. And when I use this image of heroes, I'm not talking about caped heroes primarily, but I'm talking about people, mentors, role models, people who are a part of our lives who do very special and unique things that show us potentials. You know, recently, and the reason that we've moved into this video format and audio, if you're listening on the podcasting that my daughter and I do, um, I've seen heroes step up in big ways who don't have capes. You know, our centralized character today in Rowley's book, he focuses on Superman, and we'll get into the context of that. But I want to share with you a picture that I saw earlier this week on Facebook that paints pictures beyond doubt on who the true heroes are at this time. There's a picture of Superman. He has ripped off the S from his chest, the crest. He's taken off his cape, and it's him handing his cape and emblem over to a nurse. There's so many people right now in this time of new living. This is definitely a time of new living for us, and they're the heroes. You know, the grocery store attendants who are bagging groceries so that we can have things that we need. And unfortunately, sometimes when we go out and get something we don't need, even though we're supposed to be staying at home and lowering the curve, um, they're the ones that are in forced interaction every day. You know, the doctors and the nurses that are firsthand. I just learned, you know, one of the kids who's no longer a child anymore, very very much a grown adult lady, is working as a physical therapist in a COVID wing right now. So there's so many people that are the heroes who are doing things that they need to be doing to help us through trying to figure out how to live right now in this new living that we're a part of. Now, I'm going to break out of the current situation. I've always intended for these to solely focus on Matt Rowley's book, and what a blessing it's been for me to kind of journey through this book during this time of Lent. And here we are. This is the last week of Lent, and I've seen my Lenten promise through. I always add something every year, and this year I added a Bible study. And Even though circumstances changed the way that Bible study looked, worked, functioned, here we are. Now, in this last chapter, the focus is life, death, and the resurrection. And what a beautiful imagery that exists within this. And the beautiful imagery that comes from the centralized superhero that Matt Rowley chose to use for this section. He used Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, Superman, Clark Kent. I want to talk for a few minutes because he uses the imagery that came from the death of Superman storyline. And again, as I've done in other sections of this, if you're more into watching the movies than reading the comic books, if you saw the movie Batman versus Superman, there's elements of the death of Superman storyline that exist in this. That when that I believe it was Christopher Nolan that did that movie. I'm not quite sure. I will be corrected by someone that's watching this. When they made that movie, they tied elements of the Dark Knight Returns and the Rise of the Dark Knight and the death of Superman. They kind of sew these two stories together. One where there is a hero, Batman, who is concerned over the superior powers that a Superman could have over culture and society, and the dangerous side effects that could come from that. And it goes through the death of Superman storyline of his interaction with Doomsday. But when you look at this storyline, we begin to see a complete picture of what a hero is. When we think of heroes, especially superheroes, they're supposed to be indestructible. The Lone Ranger always finds a way to outlast the Cavendish gang. Batman always found a way to break out of the perils that combined the two episodes of the week. Superman was this indestructible hero that nothing could penetrate except for an image of his history. And we always look towards these people as being the indestructible ones who we always knew that would overcome peril. But then we get to this moment of the death of Superman. Now, I'll share with you, I was in my high school years and very much deeply in my beginning stages of interacting with comics, buying comics when the death of Superman came out. It was very much. I remember getting the comic book that introduced the character Doomsday, who was the Kryptonian descendant that was discovered and came to be the one to destroy the Man of Steel. And reading that entire storyline, you begin to see an image of vulnerability within the superhero. And it's that image of vulnerability that becomes very crucial, especially when we talk about what it means to live. There's a television show that was on for quite a while. Very good program. If you're looking for something to watch as you are quarantined in your homes, I suggest to go to Netflix, and I want you to watch this show called The Good Place. Now, The Good Place follows a centralized character who's played by Kristen Bell. And Kristen Bell dies, but she becomes a part of this experiment that towards the end of the series, and the series had just this past season had its season finale, weighs out what it means to truly live. And spoilers, watch it. I'm not going to mess up anything for you by saying this. The centralized theme when they get to the end of it all is what it means to truly live is to value what we have because one day we might lose it. Now, we don't always get to see that image in a hero. Again, we see the indestructible Man of Steel who will always solve the problem. The man who can't die until we get to the death of Superman storyline. We have these indestructible gods like Thor or Shazam or Wonder Woman who have no image of an ending. So we don't see the vulnerability, but it's the vulnerability that always exists in us. I'll share with you. I don't believe that faith is a fire escape plan. And when I make that sarcastic statement, I know when I was a kid, it's why I started going to church. I began to ponder the difference between heaven and hell, and I knew I didn't want to go to hell. So when I started my faith journey very early on, it was about the payoff. It was about, how do I deal with the one insecurity in my life that I have no resolve for? I have no resolve that there's going to be an ending. But I do have a promise that comes through the grace of Jesus Christ that there's hope after that ending. It's my vulnerability that made it very important for me to become an explorer of what faith is. And then, through time, I began to see that it's not the conclusion or the payoff that matters. It's through watching the vulnerability of my heroes that I began to see that there is potential in the moment more than the payoff at the end. I'll share with you, there's and within the death of Superman storyline, there's this moment that you really begin to see Kal-El, Clark Kent, Superman, begin to process what it means to be a hero in vulnerability. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about heroes in brokenness, and we used the images of Tony Stark, and we used the image of Anne Frank as the image of heroes in brokenness. Tony Stark dealing with his personal brokenness, Anne Frank living in a life that exists in a broken world. But there's a difference between living in brokenness and living in vulnerability. When we get to a moment of vulnerability, there's honesty that has to come across. There's honesty that there's things that matter and there's things that don't matter. When Superman begins to realize that there is an ending within his battle with Doomsday, Superman fights harder, even though Superman comes to a conclusion. There's vulnerability in that moment because he wants to be the protector of Metropolis, and he knows that there is a potential, finally, of true failure. Many of the people that I have looked upon as I have addressed vulnerability in my life and what it means, those are the people that have reshaped what faith means to me. I've shared with many of those within our faith community, within the people that have ever heard me share a sermon. There's a hero in my life who reached in a moment of vulnerability and created potential for the greater world. My hero is a man named Harry Chapin. And for those of you that liked 70s pop music, 70s folk rock, one man, one guitar storytellers, Harry Chapin's the guy that wrote the song Cats in a Cradle, and he's the guy that wrote the song Taxi, two of his more popular songs. But he looked into a world of vulnerability, and he was I think he was directing the movie. I don't think he wrote it, but there was a movie that he helped called Universal Champions. And Universal Champions was this boxing movie that he traveled to Africa to help record. And while that he was in Africa, he saw famine. He saw people starving and living within a world that has enough food for everyone a part of it. He saw no need in that. He took a moment of that vulnerability and made it potential for other people to find a resurrection. Within that too, my faith life began to transform the more I learned about the founder of the United Methodist Church, John Wesley, the one person who proclaimed the world is a parish, the one person who proclaimed to do all the good we can in all the ways we can in all the places we can for all the people we can by all the means we can. a person willing to step out and to be the caregiver in places of true vulnerability. When we stop looking at faith through there's an ending point and what's the payoff, we begin to really talk about what it means to live with faith, to be people who live as caregivers in the moment, the ones who are looking for what it truly means to love your neighbor as you love yourself, and not the ones looking for a payoff at the end of the road. That's what I really began to look at, what I really began to connect to as we finally reached this moment that the major superhero of the DC universe was about to die. Was his willingness to do more and fight more and to share more. You know, this storyline really isn't a part of the death of Superman, but it came across another moment of vulnerability for me. You know, within the world of comic books and so forth, all the new comic books come out on Wednesdays, and that's the new storylines are there. You go out, you have the guy at the comic book store. They hold your stack for you. You pay for them, take them home, and read them. And it's always come out on Wednesdays. Now, the importance of that statement exists in a realm of vulnerability that I existed in. And it became a story that helped me get through another very scary moment in living. For those of us that remember September 11th, 2001, that happened on a Tuesday. We all sat in front of our televisions and we watched planes ram into the Twin Towers. We watched New York crumble. We watched the world with the United States cry. We watched New York suffer. And we all lived in a moment of fear and wonderment of what's next. What can we do? How can we live through this? The next day was Wednesday. And for me to exist in my place of normality just for a moment while still trying to comprehend what was happening in the greater world, I went to the comic book store. I got my comics for that week, and the comic book that came out that day was, I used to could recite the number, but I do know it was Superman, and the title of the Superman comic was, "This is not a job for Superman." Let me explain to you what happens in the comic. And it begins to reflect an image of vulnerability in the people of Metropolis that I was feeling in the moment of September the 11th. When you read the comic that came out on September 12th, 2001, there is a story of a collapse of Luther Towers. Now, Luther Towers were two standing side-by-side buildings in the shape of an L moving away from each other. Two buildings standing side by side that were destroyed in the comic book. Lex Luthor gets mad at Superman and is complaining about how that the alien could have helped prevent this. And there's a grouping of construction workers who are there listening to this, and they step up and say, the importance of a Superman is to remind us what we have to do. The importance of a Superman is to set an image for us to step up and live. Even though that Superman is the great being, the great superhero, even Superman can't be everywhere. And the construction workers said, this isn't a job for Superman to rebuild. This is our job to rebuild. Sitting in a moment of vulnerability, understanding the difference between life and death, looking at a moment of fear and worry. The words of a construction worker defending Superman was a reminder for me and many of us within the geekdom that we have our superheroes and we have times that we are the hands and feet that show the difference. I want to talk to you about that on a different level, because one of the things that I like to point out in the reality of Christ's journey to the cross is Christ's moment of vulnerability. When we think about what it means to get to a point that we question what's next, when we realize that there could be a conclusion, that there could be an ending, even Christ at a time showed a moment of intense vulnerability. When you look at the reality of Christ's prayer on Gethsemane, and Christ is praying, and it's Christ alone, and Christ utters the words, "If there be any other way, take this cup from me." That prayer has become very important to me. Because as I talk about a Christ who put on flesh to live and breathe, to walk and talk with us, to show what it means to live in a world with questions and wonderment, what it means to be on a journey that we don't really know what's next, but we know that there's a gift waiting. That moment of Christ's vulnerability showed me that it's okay to be a complete person. It's in our moments of vulnerability that we begin to realize the full potential of who we can be or who we should be. And it's the fight or flight response that we have within these moments that shows whether that we're living a life that adds life to other people, or are we just on a journey to an ending that doesn't matter to anyone but ourselves. See, that's the difference when we get to the moment of the resurrection. When we get to the moment of the resurrection, there's a new potential and a new hope that exists within the world. There's a resurrection that exists while we're living. If we become the ones who do all the good we can for all the people we can and all the places we can, by all the means we can and all the ways we can, we are creating resurrections from vulnerability within the lives of others. That's the importance of a hero. Is the one that can reach into the moments of vulnerability and pull us and resurrect us to a place of hope and newness. If you saw the Man of Steel was the one. It was a new attempt to start with the Superman who became the Superman in the Justice League movies. There's a reality that they share in it, and it's the reality of what the S means on Superman's shield. The S does not stand for Superman because it's a Kryptonian symbol and they don't speak English. The S on Superman's emblem actually means it's a Kryptonian symbol for hope. And what it means to become the image of hope and to create hope and newness within another person, within another society, within another culture. To become an image that people can look to in moments of vulnerability and pave a way to a place where things may end up being okay. It's just the hope. It's the hope that gets us through. I'll share with you when I was in high school, I had a question. Like I loved Jesus very loudly in very moments of my high school life, and I had a friend, and we were buddies, but he and I didn't believe in things in the same way, and he always asked me, "What if you're wrong? What if you're wrong?" Well, if I'm wrong, I get to the end of the road, and that's it. If I'm wrong. But if I'm right, at least in my life, and even if I'm wrong, at least in my life, I had this thing that gave me hope. I had this thing that showed me a possible and possibility. I had this thing in my life that added and gave my life value. So if I'm wrong, okay, I still have hope. And if I'm right, then I'm sharing a hope with so many other people in so many vulnerable places that we're creating daily resurrections. That's what I get out. That's what I got out of this last chapter from Rally. It's this idea that we're not truly living until that we get to the point that we are adding to the lives of others. Like it's this point that death isn't an ending. It's just the path to what's next. And the more that we create daily resurrections through the reality of being images of hope that opens doors of care for other people, then we get a chance to celebrate what the true resurrection is. The place of hope and care that is created by the grace and love of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. For those of you that started on this journey with us on YouTube at week 3, thank you. For you guys that did the first 2 weeks at the Faith Center and saw it all the way through, your Lenten promise is complete. And this has been a true blessing for me. This has been week 6 of Matt Rowley's book, What Makes a Hero? My name is the Reverend Michael Drew Davis. Blessings and peace to you all. Amen.